Settle in, take a slow breath, and allow your thoughts to drift gently backward through time. Far beyond the noise of modern life, beyond factories, empires, and crowded cities, lies a quiet beginning. A beginning not marked by conquest or war, but by leaves, water, and patience. Long before tea became a daily habit, before it filled porcelain cups or lined kitchen shelves, it existed only as a wild plant growing silently in the misty hills of ancient China. This story begins more than 5,000 years ago, in a world where humans lived close to nature and observed it carefully, believing that wisdom could be found in plants, rivers, and the changing seasons. According to Chinese tradition, the discovery of tea is tied to a legendary ruler named Shen Nong, the divine farmer. Shen Nong was said to live around 2737 BC, during a time when myth and history blended seamlessly together. He was not remembered as a conqueror, but as a healer and teacher. His task, according to legend, was to travel the land, tasting plants to discover which were nourishing and which were poisonous. In this ancient world, medicine and daily life were inseparable. Food was medicine. Herbs were knowledge. Survival depended on careful observation and memory. One day, the story goes, Shen Nong was resting beneath a wild tree while his servants boiled water nearby. As the water simmered gently, a few leaves drifted down from the tree and landed in the pot. The water changed color, turning a pale golden green. Curious, Shen Nong drank the liquid. Almost immediately, he felt refreshed. His mind cleared. His body felt lighter. Unlike other plants he had tested, many of which made him ill, this one brought clarity and balance. Thus, tea entered human history not as a drink of pleasure but as a medicine. Whether or not this moment happened exactly as described matters less than what it represents. From the very beginning, tea was associated with health, awareness, and harmony with nature. In its earliest form, tea was not brewed delicately. Leaves were chewed raw, boiled into thick broths, or mixed with other herbs. It was consumed by healers, monks, and farmers who believed it could purify the body, improve digestion, and sharpen the mind. For centuries, tea remained largely a regional practice, used by communities in what is now southwestern China, particularly in the regions of Yunnan, Sichuan, and Guangxi. The tea plant, Camellia sinensis, thrived in warm, humid climates with misty mountains and rich soil. As Chinese civilization slowly developed, so too did tea. During the early dynasties, especially the Xia, Shang, and Zhou, tea was still rare and valued mainly for its medicinal properties. It was often bitter, strong, and taken in small quantities. Drinking tea was not yet a social ritual. It was practical, purposeful, and quiet. Over time, knowledge of tea spread along river valleys and mountain paths. Farmers learned when to harvest leaves. Healers learned which preparations worked best. Monks discovered that tea helped them remain awake during long hours of meditation. This connection between tea and mental clarity would shape its future profoundly. By the time of the Han Dynasty, 206 BC, 220 AD, tea had begun to move beyond medicine and into daily life. It was still not widespread, but it was becoming familiar. Written records from this period mention tea as a bitter but beneficial drink, used to aid digestion and reduce fatigue. Importantly, tea began to intersect with Chinese philosophy. Taoist thinkers valued balance, simplicity, and natural flow. Tea, with its subtle effects and connection to the natural world, fit easily into this worldview. It did not intoxicate like alcohol. It did not overwhelm the senses. Instead, It encouraged calm alertness. Confucian values, too, found harmony with tea. Respect, moderation, and ritual would later shape how tea was prepared and served. Even in these early stages, tea was already becoming something more than a plant. It was becoming a cultural companion. As centuries passed, tea gradually entered homes, monasteries, and courts. Preparation methods improved. Leaves were steamed, dried, and shaped. Flavor became important. The bitterness softened. Aroma emerged. Yet tea never lost its original character. It remained quiet. It did not demand attention. It did not rush. It rewarded patience. By the end of this early period, tea had firmly rooted itself in Chinese life. It was no longer just a healer's tool or a farmer's remedy. It was becoming a daily presence, something that accompanied thought, conversation, and silence alike. This slow, organic beginning explains something essential about tea's long history. Tea did not spread through force or conquest. It spread through habit, observation, and gentle usefulness. In the centuries to come, tea would travel far beyond China, across mountains, deserts, and oceans. It would shape empires, inspire ceremonies, and even spark revolutions. But at its heart, tea would always remain what it was in the beginning: a simple leaf, warm water, and a quiet moment of calm. In the next part, we will move forward into Imperial China, where tea evolves into an art form, a subject of poetry, and a pillar of daily life, slowly, steadily, and without urgency. For now, rest here in the soft mist of ancient hills, where tea was first discovered, not as a luxury but as a gentle gift from nature. Small farming communities slowly grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. Roads followed rivers, and rivers carried ideas along with goods. Writing became more widespread. Records were kept. Customs were refined. And within this quietly evolving civilization, tea continued its slow journey from medicinal herb to daily companion. By the time of the Han Dynasty, tea was no longer confined to healers and monks alone. It had begun to appear in ordinary households, especially in southern regions where the tea plant grew naturally. Still bitter, still simple, tea was valued for its ability to cool the body, settle the stomach, and sharpen the mind. Yet it was during the centuries that followed, the long era between the fall of the Han and the rise of the Tang, that tea truly began to transform. China entered a period of fragmentation and rebuilding. Dynasties rose and fell. Borders shifted, but culture continued quietly beneath the surface. Buddhism spread across the land, carried by monks traveling from India and Central Asia. With Buddhism came long hours of meditation, chanting, and study. Tea found a new home in the monastery. Monks discovered that tea helped them remain awake during extended meditation sessions. It cleared the mind without disturbing it. Unlike wine, which dulled awareness, tea sharpened it. Unlike stimulants, which agitated the body, tea soothed it. Gradually, tea drinking became woven into monastic routine. It was prepared carefully, consumed mindfully, and shared communally. In this quiet religious setting, tea took on spiritual significance, not as a sacred substance, but as a practical aid to awareness. This association between tea and calm alertness would remain central to its identity for centuries. The true turning point came during the Tang Dynasty, 680–907 AD, often regarded as a golden age of Chinese culture. The Tang period was marked by prosperity, stability, and openness to ideas. Trade flourished along the Silk Road. Cities expanded. poetry, art, and philosophy reached new heights. And tea, at last, stepped fully into the center of Chinese life. During the Tang Dynasty, tea moved beyond medicine and monastery into everyday culture. Tea houses appeared in cities and towns, offering a place for travelers, merchants, and locals to rest and converse. Tea was no longer merely consumed, it was appreciated. Preparation methods became more refined. Tea leaves were steamed, compressed into cakes, ground into powder, and whisked into hot water. The act of making tea became deliberate and rhythmic. Water temperature mattered. Utensils mattered. Timing mattered. Tea began to reflect something deeply Chinese. The idea that beauty could be found in simplicity and meaning in repetition. It was during this period that tea gained its first great philosopher. His name was Lu Yu. Born in the early 8th century, Lu Yu was an orphan raised in a Buddhist monastery. He grew up surrounded by books, nature, and quiet contemplation. Over the course of his life, he devoted himself to understanding tea, not just as a drink, but as a cultural practice. Around 760 AD, Lu Yu wrote a remarkable book called The Classic of Tea, Cha Jiang. It was the first comprehensive work ever written on tea, covering everything from cultivation and preparation to tools, water quality, and spiritual attitude. Lu Yu believed that tea should be made with care and humility. He criticized extravagance and artificiality. He praised simplicity, natural materials, and attentiveness. For him, tea was not about display. It was about balance between human effort and nature's gift. The Classic of Tea transformed tea from a habit into an art. After Lu Yu, tea culture spread rapidly throughout China. Scholars drank tea while composing poetry. Officials served tea during conversations. Artists depicted tea gatherings in ink and brush. Tea became associated with refinement, learning, and quiet sophistication. Yet tea remained accessible. Unlike rare wines or luxurious foods, tea could be enjoyed by all classes of society. Farmers drank it after long days in the fields. Travelers carried it on journeys. Families shared it during ordinary moments. Tea belonged to everyone. As tea's popularity grew, so did its economic importance. Tea cultivation expanded into new regions. Tea taxes were introduced. Entire communities depended on tea production and trade. Roads were built. Markets formed. Still, tea retained its gentle character. It was not consumed in haste. It did not dominate the senses. It accompanied conversation without overwhelming it. It filled silence without breaking it. By the end of the Tang Dynasty, tea had become inseparable from Chinese daily life. It was no longer simply a drink. It was a rhythm, a pause in the day, a shared moment, a quiet ritual. In the centuries that followed, tea would continue to evolve. Preparation styles would change. New philosophies would emerge. Tea would travel beyond China's borders, carried by monks, merchants, and diplomats. But its heart remained the same. A leaf. Water. Time. In the next part, we will explore tea and Buddhism, and how tea traveled from China to Korea and Japan, where it would be transformed into one of the most deliberate and meditative rituals in human history. For now, rest in the Tang Dynasty, where tea found its voice and silence found its companion. As tea settled into everyday life across China, it also deepened its relationship with one of the most influential spiritual movements in Asian history, Buddhism. This relationship was not dramatic or sudden. It grew quietly, shaped by long hours of meditation, disciplined routine, and the search for clarity of mind. Tea did not become sacred in the religious sense, but it became useful, and usefulness in monastic life carried great meaning. Buddhist monks often spent many hours sitting in meditation. Silence was essential. Awareness was everything. Sleepiness, however, was a constant challenge. Tea offered a simple solution. It helped monks remain awake without agitation. It sharpened focus without breaking calm. Slowly, tea became part of monastic routine. Monks drank tea before meditation, after study, and during long nights of prayer. Preparing tea itself became a mindful act. Water was heated gently. Leaves were handled with care. Movements were deliberate and unhurried. The process mirrored meditation itself. In this way, tea became a companion to inner stillness. Buddhist philosophy emphasized impermanence, simplicity, and direct experience. Tea fit naturally within this worldview. It required attention but not excess. It rewarded patience. It invited presence. Drinking tea was not about indulgence, it was about awareness. As Buddhism spread throughout China during the Tang and Song dynasties, tea traveled with it. Monasteries became centers not only of spiritual learning, but also of tea cultivation and refinement. Monks experimented with growing methods, preparation styles, and tools. Gradually, tea became associated with a particular kind of calm intelligence, a mind awake but not restless. This association would shape tea's journey beyond China. During the 8th and 9th centuries, Buddhist monks traveled abroad, carrying scriptures, rituals, and habits with them. Among these habits was tea drinking. Through these quiet journeys, tea crossed the sea. It first reached the Korean peninsula, where it was adopted by Buddhist communities and royal courts. Tea in Korea developed its own character, simple, restrained, and closely tied to meditation and seasonal rhythms. But it was in Japan that tea would undergo one of its most profound transformations. According to tradition, tea was introduced to Japan by Buddhist monks who had studied in China. One of the most famous was Eisai, a Zen monk who returned to Japan in the late 12th century. Eisai not only brought tea seeds with him, but also wrote about tea's health benefits and spiritual value. In Japan, tea found fertile ground, not only in the soil but in philosophy. Zen Buddhism, with its emphasis on direct experience and disciplined simplicity, embraced tea wholeheartedly. Tea drinking became closely associated with meditation practice. Monks drank tea to stay awake during long hours of seated meditation, just as their Chinese predecessors had done centuries earlier. But something new began to emerge. In Japan, the act of preparing tea was refined to an extraordinary degree. Movements were slowed, gestures were simplified, tools were chosen carefully. Silence was respected. Every detail mattered, not because it was impressive, but because it was intentional. This approach reflected a core Zen idea, that enlightenment could be found in ordinary actions performed with full awareness. Tea was no longer merely a drink, it became a discipline. Over time, this discipline evolved into what would later be known as the Japanese tea ceremony, a practice that emphasized humility, harmony, respect, and tranquility. Though the formal ceremony would develop later, its roots lay here, in monasteries and quiet rooms where monks prepared tea as an extension of meditation. Even the taste of tea changed. In China, tea had been compressed into cakes or brewed from leaves. In Japan, powdered green tea, matcha, became dominant. Leaves were ground finely and whisked into hot water, producing a smooth, vibrant drink. The act of whisking itself became meditative, rhythmic, and precise. Tea drinking became an expression of Zen values: simplicity over luxury, authenticity over display, presence over distraction. Meanwhile, back in China, tea culture continued to evolve during the Song dynasty. Scholars and officials refined tea competitions, judged foam quality, and debated ideal water sources. Tea gatherings became intellectual as well as social. Yet even in these refined settings, tea never lost its quiet nature. Across East Asia, tea had now established a shared identity. Whether consumed in monasteries, homes, or courts, tea represented a pause, a moment between actions, a breath between thoughts. It did not intoxicate. It did not overwhelm. It simply accompanied. As tea continued its journey, it would soon leave East Asia entirely. Caravans would carry it across deserts. Ships would carry it across oceans. New cultures would adopt it, adapt it, and reshape it. But wherever tea traveled, it carried something of its origins with it. The memory of monks sitting quietly, the sound of water heating slowly, and the calm awareness of the present moment. In the next part, we will follow tea beyond monasteries and islands, along trade routes and caravans, into the wider world of merchants, travelers, and distant civilizations. For now, rest here, in the stillness of a monastery, where tea and silence first learned to walk together. As tea took root in Japan, it began a transformation unlike any it had experienced before. What had arrived as a practical aid for meditation slowly evolved into one of the most deliberate and refined rituals in human history. This change did not happen quickly. For centuries, tea in Japan remained largely within monasteries. Zen monks cultivated tea plants near temples, prepared the drink in simple ways, and consumed it quietly before meditation. Tea was valued not for taste alone, but for its ability to support awareness and discipline. Over time, however, tea moved beyond monastery walls. By the 13th and 14th centuries, tea drinking had spread to the Japanese warrior class, the samurai. These men lived lives shaped by violence, loyalty, and strict codes of conduct. Zen Buddhism appealed deeply to them, offering mental clarity and emotional control. Tea, as a companion to Zen practice, followed naturally. Samurai gatherings often included tea drinking, initially informal and sometimes extravagant. Wealthy warriors displayed rare tea bowls imported from China, prized for their beauty and cost. Tea gatherings could become competitions, focused more on status than stillness. Yet a quiet reaction began to form. Some practitioners felt that tea had drifted too far from its original spirit. Instead of encouraging humility and presence, it had become a display of wealth. A counter-movement emerged, one that sought to return tea to simplicity. This movement would shape tea forever. At the heart of this transformation was a philosophy known as wabi-sabi, an appreciation of imperfection, impermanence, and simplicity. Rather than polished luxury, wabi-sabi valued rough textures, muted colors, and quiet emptiness. Beauty was found not in excess but in restraint. Tea became the perfect expression of this philosophy. By the 15th and 16th centuries, tea masters began to codify what would become the Japanese tea ceremony, or chanoyu. The ceremony was not about drinking tea quickly or casually. It was about slowing down completely. Every element was intentional. The tea room itself was small, often entered through a low door that required guests to bow. This physical act reminded everyone, samurai and noble alike, that status was left outside. Inside, all were equal. The room was sparse. A single hanging scroll, a simple flower arrangement, empty space, silence. The tea utensils were chosen carefully. Bowls were often handmade, uneven, sometimes cracked or asymmetrical. These imperfections were not flaws. They were embraced as evidence of human touch in time's passage. The host prepared the tea with slow, deliberate movements. Water was heated gently. Matcha powder was measured carefully. The whisk moved rhythmically, quietly. There was no hurry. Guests watched in silence. When the tea was served, it was received with both hands, examined briefly, and sipped slowly. Conversation, if any, was minimal and thoughtful. The focus was not on taste alone, but on the shared moment. The ceremony emphasized 4 guiding principles. Harmony Wa, respect K, purity Se, tranquility Jaku. These principles extended beyond the tea room. They were meant to shape daily life. Perhaps the most influential figure in shaping the tea ceremony was Shen Nong, a tea master of the 16th century. Rikyu refined the ceremony into its most minimal form. He rejected luxury, favored simple tools, and emphasized spiritual depth over appearance. For Rikyu, tea was not an escape from life. It was life itself, distilled into a single moment. Prepare tea as if it is the most important thing you will do today. Drink tea as if nothing else exists. This mindset resonated deeply in Japan, a society shaped by discipline, ritual, and attention to detail. The tea ceremony became a cultural cornerstone, practiced by warriors, nobles, monks, and eventually common people. Importantly, tea did not become loud or theatrical. It remained quiet. It demanded patience. It rewarded stillness. It turned ordinary actions into mindful acts. Even today, the influence of the tea ceremony can be felt throughout Japanese culture, in architecture, calligraphy, gardening, and daily etiquette. The values of simplicity and presence continue to echo. While Japan refined tea into ritual, the rest of the world was beginning to encounter it for the first time. Merchants, travelers, and caravans carried tea westward, across mountains and deserts, toward lands where tea was unknown. In the next part, we will leave the tea room behind and follow tea along trade routes into Central Asia, the Islamic world, and beyond, where it would begin its long journey toward global fame. For now, remain seated in the quiet tea room. The water is warm. The bowl is empty. The moment is complete. While tea was being refined into ritual in China and Japan, it was also beginning a very different journey, one that carried it far beyond monasteries and tea rooms, into the wide, dusty spaces between civilizations. This journey unfolded slowly, carried not by armies or emperors, but by merchants, caravans, and travelers. Tea began moving westward along the vast network of trade routes collectively known as the Silk Road. These routes connected East Asia with Central Asia, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. They were not a single road, but many paths, winding through deserts, over mountains, and across grasslands. Caravans moved at a measured pace. Camels carried silk, spices, porcelain, and increasingly tea. Tea traveled in compressed bricks or tightly packed bundles, forms that preserved it and made it easier to transport across long distances. In these early stages, tea was not yet a common drink outside China. To many people in Central Asia, it was unfamiliar, bitter, green, and strange. But traders noticed something important. Tea lasted. Unlike fresh foods, tea could survive long journeys. Unlike alcohol, it did not spoil. Unlike water, it could be boiled safely. For travelers crossing harsh landscapes, this mattered. Gradually, tea found a place among the peoples of Central Asia, among nomads, traders, and border communities who valued practicality. Tea was often boiled with milk, salt, or butter, transforming it into a nourishing drink suited to cold climates and long days on horseback. Here, tea was no longer delicate or ceremonial. It was functional. It warmed the body. It restored energy. It sustained life. As tea moved further west, it entered the Islamic world. By the early medieval period, Islamic civilization stretched from Spain to Persia. Cities like Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Samarkand were centers of learning, trade, and culture. These societies already had a strong tradition of social beverages, most notably coffee, which would rise to prominence slightly later. Tea arrived quietly. At first, it was a curiosity, known mainly among merchants and scholars. It was appreciated for its medicinal qualities and its ability to promote alertness, qualities already valued in Islamic intellectual life, where long hours of study and prayer were common. Tea did not replace coffee. Instead, the two drinks occupied different spaces. Coffee thrived in public coffeehouses, places of conversation, debate, and social exchange. Tea, by contrast, often remained more private, consumed in homes or during travel. In regions such as Persia, tea gradually gained popularity, especially in colder climates where its warmth was welcome. Over time, tea would become deeply embedded in Persian culture, eventually surpassing coffee as the dominant drink. Along these routes, tea continued to adapt. Preparation methods changed. Ingredients were added. Customs shifted. But tea remained recognizable, a leaf steeped in hot water, offering calm energy without intoxication. By this point in history, tea had already traveled thousands of kilometers from its place of origin. It had crossed linguistic, religious, and cultural boundaries with remarkable ease. And still, it had not reached Europe. Europe at this time remained largely unaware of tea. Medieval Europeans drank water, beer, wine, and herbal infusions. Tea was unknown, unimagined, and unnecessary. That would soon change. The final phase of tea's journey would come not over land but by sea. Ships would carry it across oceans. Empires would rise around it. Wars would be fought over it. Revolutions would be inspired by it. But all of that lay far in the future. For now, tea rested in caravan camps, desert inns, and quiet homes along the Silk Road. It warmed hands on cold nights. It soothed travelers at dawn. It accompanied stories told in many languages. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived. In the next part, we will follow tea as it reaches the edges of Europe, entering the ports of maritime empires and slowly making its way into royal courts, merchant houses, and everyday life. For now, imagine a caravan at rest beneath a wide desert sky. The fire burns low. A kettle warms quietly. Tea waits, as it always has, for the next traveler. For thousands of years, tea had lived an almost entirely Asian life. It had grown in Chinese mountains, rested in monasteries, crossed deserts with caravans, and warmed travelers along distant trade routes. Europe remained untouched by its presence, separated by oceans, unfamiliar tastes, and different habits. That separation began to fade in the 16th century. Europe was changing. Maritime exploration had replaced overland trade. Ships sailed farther than ever before, connecting continents through newly forged sea routes. Spices, silks, porcelain, and unfamiliar plants flowed into European ports. Alongside these goods came quiet curiosities, among them tea. The first Europeans to encounter tea were Portuguese traders and missionaries operating in East Asia. In the early 1500s, Portugal established trading posts along the Chinese coast. There, Europeans observed local customs, including tea drinking. At first, tea made little impression. It was unfamiliar, bitter, subtle. Europeans were accustomed to strong flavors, wine, beer, ale, and herbal brews. Tea did not intoxicate, it did not warm the blood like alcohol. It simply lingered. Still, curiosity remained. By the early 17th century, tea reached Europe in small quantities through the Dutch East India Company. The Dutch, practical and trade-focused, introduced tea into ports such as Amsterdam. From there, it spread quietly to France and other parts of Western Europe. Tea was rare, expensive, exotic. At first, it was sold primarily as a medicine. Apothecaries claimed it could cure headaches, digestive problems, fatigue, and melancholy. Physicians debated its effects. Some praised it as cleansing and restorative. Others warned it was foreign and untested. For most Europeans, tea remained out of reach, something whispered about, not consumed. This changed slowly, and then suddenly in England. Tea arrived in England during the mid-1600s, but it remained obscure until a single social shift altered its fate forever. In 1662, Catherine of Braganza, a Portuguese princess, married King Charles II of England. Catherine was accustomed to drinking tea daily, a habit learned in her homeland's trade networks with Asia. At court, Catherine continued this practice. Soon, tea appeared in royal circles. Nobles imitated the queen. Tea became fashionable. What had once been medicinal became social. Tea drinking spread from palace rooms into aristocratic salons. Porcelain cups were imported. Kettles were refined. Tea tables became places of conversation, politeness, and restraint. Unlike alehouses, tea spaces were calm. Unlike taverns, tea rooms were respectable, especially for women. Tea offered a sober alternative to alcohol, aligning neatly with emerging ideas of civility and order. By the early 18th century, tea had become deeply embedded in British daily life. Tea taxes filled government coffers. Tea imports soared. Tea replaced ale as the breakfast drink of choice. Yet tea was still expensive. Smuggling flourished. Illegal tea flooded coastal villages. Entire underground networks emerged to avoid heavy taxation. Tea was no longer just a drink, it was an economic force. Meanwhile, European tastes adapted. Milk was added, sugar sweetened bitterness. Tea became softer, richer, more comforting. What had once been subtle became familiar. Tea had changed Europe, but Europe had also changed tea. As demand grew, European powers sought control over tea production itself. Relying on Chinese imports was risky and expensive. This desire would soon reshape global history. Tea would fuel empires. Tea would justify colonization. Tea would help spark revolution. But for now, tea rested quietly on wooden tables in English homes, steaming gently, paired with conversation, bread, and habit. It had crossed oceans not with force, but with patience. In the next part, we will explore tea, empire, and colonial ambition, as Britain seeks to control tea's source and reshapes the world in the process. For now, imagine an early morning in a quiet English household. The kettle whistles softly. Cups are set carefully. Tea has found another home. By the early 18th century, tea was no longer a novelty in Europe. It had become a habit, quiet, comforting, and deeply woven into daily life, especially in Britain. What began as an exotic curiosity had transformed into a national obsession. And obsessions, when shared by millions, reshape history. Britain drank tea in astonishing quantities. Every year, ships returned from Asia carrying chests filled with dried leaves, carefully packed to preserve their aroma. Tea flowed into ports, warehouses, markets, and homes. It fueled mornings, soothed evenings, and softened the harsh rhythms of industrial life. But tea had a problem. Britain loved tea, but China controlled it. For centuries, China remained the world's sole large-scale producer of tea. Chinese merchants dictated prices. European traders were allowed to operate only under strict rules, confined to designated ports, forbidden from traveling inland or learning the secrets of cultivation. To acquire tea, Britain paid in silver. And the silver flowed outward, year after year, draining British reserves. This trade imbalance troubled merchants and politicians alike. An empire could not thrive while bleeding precious metals. Britain needed leverage. That leverage came in the form of opium. The British East India Company, already ruling large parts of India, discovered a grim solution. Opium could be grown in India, processed cheaply, and sold profitably. Though illegal in China, demand existed. Quietly at first, then aggressively, British traders began smuggling opium into Chinese ports. Chinese officials protested. Laws were passed. Opium was confiscated and destroyed. Addiction spread among civilians and soldiers alike. Social order weakened. What followed was inevitable. In 1839, the Qing government seized and destroyed massive quantities of British opium. Britain responded not with diplomacy, but with war. The First Opium War was short, brutal, and devastating for China. British naval power overwhelmed outdated Chinese defenses. Ports were forced open. Treaties were imposed. Among the consequences was one of history's most famous trade agreements, the Treaty of Nanking. China ceded Hong Kong. Ports were open to foreign trade. Tea flowed outward more freely than ever before. Britain secured its supply, but at enormous human cost. Tea, once peaceful, had become tied to imperial violence. Yet Britain was not satisfied. Even with open ports, China still controlled production. The dream of growing tea elsewhere, under British control, became an obsession. And so attention turned to India. In the jungles of Assam, British explorers made a discovery that would change everything. Wild tea plants, Camellia sinensis, grew naturally in northeastern India. The climate was suitable. The soil was rich. The British East India Company moved quickly. Plantations were established. Forests were cleared. Indigenous populations were displaced. Workers, often impoverished peasants, were bound by harsh contracts, forced into grueling labor under tropical conditions. Tea cultivation was no longer spiritual or communal. It was industrial. At the same time, Britain secretly sent botanists and spies into China. One of them, Robert Fortune, disguised himself as a Chinese merchant, learned tea processing techniques, stole seeds and smuggled them out. Centuries of guarded knowledge crossed borders hidden in crates. By the mid-19th century, tea production had shifted dramatically. India and later Ceylon, Sri Lanka became major producers. British control tightened. Tea prices fell, consumption rose. Tea was no longer just for the elite. It became the drink of factory workers, sailors, clerks, and families. A cheap stimulant that sharpened focus without intoxication, perfect for the industrial age. Tea breaks entered factory schedules. Tea stalls lined streets. Tea became routine. And yet behind every cup was a web of empire, of labor, land, and loss. Still, tea continued its quiet work. It comforted the weary. It structured the day. It gave pause to motion. In distant colonies, tea reshaped landscapes and lives. In Britain, it reshaped culture itself. And across the Atlantic, tea would soon spark rebellion. In the next part, we will explore tea and revolution, including how a quiet drink helped ignite one of history's most famous acts of defiance. For now, imagine a long sea voyage. Wooden ships, crates of tea stacked below deck, the ocean rolling endlessly. Tea continues its journey. By the mid-18th century, tea had crossed oceans, cultures, and empires. It had become ordinary in homes, yet extraordinary in influence. No longer just a comfort, tea was now entangled with power, taxes, and resistance. Nowhere was this more evident than in Britain's American colonies. In the 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast, tea was widely consumed. Colonists drank it daily, just as people did in London. It warmed cold mornings in New England and accompanied evening conversations in coastal towns. Tea had become familiar, almost invisible. But familiarity does not mean indifference. As Britain's empire expanded, so did its debts, especially after the costly 7 years war fought across Europe, North America, and India. London looked to the colonies for revenue. New taxes were imposed on stamps, paper, glass, paint, and eventually tea. The colonists protested. They argued that Parliament had no right to tax them without representation. They boycotted British goods. Tea became a symbol, not just of comfort, but of control. At first, many colonists simply stopped drinking it. Homes replaced tea with herbal infusions made from local plants, mint, sage, raspberry leaves. Refusing tea became an act of quiet defiance, especially among women who controlled household consumption. But Britain doubled down. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act. On the surface, it lowered the price of tea by allowing the struggling East India Company to sell directly to the colonies. But hidden beneath the discount was a dangerous principle. Accepting the tea meant accepting Parliament's right to tax. The tea was cheap. The message was not. Ships carrying East India Company tea sailed toward American ports. Some were turned away. Others were refused permission to unload. Tensions rose. Then came a cold December night in Boston. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists, some disguised as Mohawk Native Americans, boarded 3 ships docked in Boston Harbor. Working silently, they broke open 342 chests of tea and dumped them into the dark water below. No tea was stolen. No other cargo was touched. Only tea. The harbor filled with floating leaves, spreading across the surface like a stain. This was the Boston Tea Party. It was theatrical, symbolic and irreversible. Britain's response was swift and harsh. The port of Boston was closed. Self-government was restricted. Troops were stationed in the city. These measures, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts, inflamed anger rather than suppressing it. Tea, once again, had changed history. Within 2 years, war erupted. The American Revolution began. Colonies declared independence. A new nation emerged. And tea, so central to British identity, lost its place in American life. In the newly formed United States, tea was associated with tyranny. Coffee replaced it as the national drink. Tea did not disappear, but it retreated quietly into the background. Across the ocean, however, tea remained firmly British. In Victorian England, tea reached its cultural peak. Afternoon tea became a ritual, refined, structured, and social. Porcelain cups, tiered trays, and delicate pastries turned tea into a performance of civility. But behind the lace curtains and silver spoons, tea's imperial machinery continued. In India, plantations expanded. In Ceylon, entire economies were reshaped around tea. In Africa, new estates appeared. Millions labored so that others might pause. Tea time, peaceful as it seemed, rested on global systems of extraction and discipline. Yet tea also softened the empire it fed. It slowed conversations, encouraged reflection, created moments of pause within relentless industrial schedules. It was both tool and comfort, instrument and refuge. By the end of the 19th century, tea had become truly global. No longer bound to one culture or continent, it belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. From samovars in Russia to mint tea in Morocco, from milk tea in India to matcha in Japan, tea adapted, absorbed, and endured. And as the modern world approached, with machine speed and noise, tea remained slow. Still, waiting. In the next part, we will explore tea in the modern world, how it survived wars, industrialization, globalization, and digital life, while remaining one of humanity's quietest rituals. For now, imagine a simple cup. Steam rising gently. Hands wrapped around warmth. A pause in time. As the 19th century faded into the 20th, the world changed faster than ever before. Empires weakened. Machines grew louder. Time itself seemed to accelerate. Yet tea remained. It waited patiently on tables, in kettles, in small porcelain cups, quietly observing history unfold. The 20th century was an age of upheaval. 2 world wars reshaped borders and societies. Millions of lives were lost. Cities burned and empires collapsed. Through it all, tea continued to serve a humble role, providing warmth, familiarity, and a sense of normalcy in a fractured world. During the First World War, tea was considered essential for British soldiers. Military planners understood its value, not only for hydration but for morale. Hot tea soothed nerves, restored a sense of routine, and reminded soldiers of home. Mobile tea kitchens followed troops to the front lines, delivering steaming cups amid mud, smoke, and shell fire. Tea was comfort in chaos. In the trenches, a single cup could briefly silence fear. During the Second World War, tea again became a symbol of endurance. In Britain, despite rationing, tea was never completely removed. The government recognized its psychological importance. Even when milk and sugar were scarce, tea remained available. The phrase "keep calm" might as well have ended with "and put the kettle on." In bomb shelters during air raids, People clutched mugs as sirens wailed overhead. Tea helped steady trembling hands. It gave structure to long, uncertain nights. Outside Europe, tea cultures evolved in their own ways. In India, tea had once been an imperial imposition, but over time it was absorbed into everyday life and transformed. Spices were added: ginger, cardamom, cloves, cinnamon. Milk and sugar created chai, a drink now inseparable from Indian identity. Vendors poured it from metal kettles at train stations, roadside stalls, and busy markets. Tea was no longer British. It was local, personal, alive. In China, tea remained deeply connected to philosophy and tradition. Though political upheavals disrupted production, tea continued to symbolize balance, restraint, and continuity. Simple green teas and aged pu'er were consumed slowly, often in silence. In Japan, tea maintained its ceremonial role. Even as cities modernized, the tea ceremony endured as a reminder of patience, respect, and imperfection. Matcha preparation became an act of mindfulness, a deliberate slowing of the world. Meanwhile, the modern economy reshaped tea itself. The invention of the tea bag in the early 20th century changed how people consumed tea. What was once loose leaves steeped carefully became a quick, convenient product. Tea became faster, simpler, and more commercial. This convenience came at a cost. Flavor flattened. Ritual shortened. Attention drifted. Yet tea adapted, as it always had. By the late 20th century, a counter-movement emerged. People began rediscovering loose-leaf tea, artisanal blends, and traditional methods. Tea shops reappeared, offering calm spaces in noisy cities. Tea became associated with wellness, mindfulness, and self-care. Not rebellion. Restoration. As globalization connected cultures, tea traditions traveled freely. Bubble tea from Taiwan, Moroccan mint tea, Turkish sei, British breakfast tea, Chinese oolong, each found new audiences far from home. Tea was no longer tied to empire. It was tied to people. In the digital age, tea occupies a strange but fitting role. Surrounded by screens and notifications, many people turn to tea as an antidote. It requires waiting. Water must boil. Leaves must steep. Nothing can be rushed without consequence. Tea insists on slowness. Even now, in a world that never stops moving, tea offers a pause, a small, gentle interruption in the flow of time. And perhaps that is why tea has survived for thousands of years. Not because it fuels, but because it calms. In the final part of our journey, we will reflect on why tea endures and what it reveals about human nature, our desire for warmth, rhythm, and quiet moments in an unpredictable world. For now, let the steam rise. Let the world slow. As our long journey comes to a close, it is worth asking a simple question. Why tea? Across thousands of years, countless empires, revolutions, wars, and inventions, tea has never disappeared. It has changed form, flavor, and meaning, but it has never left human life. The answer lies not in power or profit, but in rhythm. Tea fits the human pace. Unlike wine, it does not intoxicate. Unlike coffee, it does not command urgency. Unlike spirits, it does not demand celebration. Tea asks for nothing except a little time. From the earliest Chinese farmers who first noticed the gentle bitterness of tea leaves, to monks who drank it to stay awake during meditation, tea was never meant to dominate the senses. It was meant to accompany thought, silence, and presence. Tea became a companion to reflection. As tea moved westward, it adapted, but it never lost this quality. Whether poured into delicate porcelain cups in Qing-era China, served from silver teapots in Georgian England, or ladled into chipped mugs during wartime Britain, tea always carried the same promise: warmth, pause, continuity. Empires used tea as a tool. Traders used it for profit. Governments taxed it, fought wars over it, and shaped global economies around it. But ordinary people experienced tea differently. To them, tea was not geopolitics. It was morning. It was rest. It was home. In villages, tea marked the start of the day. In cities, it marked the break between work and exhaustion. In grief, it offered something warm to hold when words failed. When societies fractured, tea remained familiar. When traditions vanished, tea persisted quietly. Even today, when the world feels overwhelming, fast, noisy, uncertain, tea remains unchanged in its basic nature. Hot water, leaves, time. It does not compete with technology. It counters it. Tea reminds us that not everything must be optimized. That waiting is not wasteful. That small rituals still matter. Perhaps this is why tea has become associated with sleep, calm storytelling, and quiet evenings. It mirrors the mind as it slows. It mirrors breath. It mirrors rest. Tea does not end. It continues. Tomorrow, someone will boil water without thinking of emperors or traders. Someone will steep leaves without knowing ancient legends. Someone will sip slowly, eyes half closed, unaware that they are participating in a ritual older than written history. And that is the greatest legacy of tea. It does not demand remembrance. It simply remains. So as this story fades into silence, imagine a cup resting nearby, steam rising softly, no urgency, no destination. Just warmth, just stillness, just tea.